Welcome back, everybody. Derek Sue, your East Oakland advocate. Well, last weekend, last Saturday and Sunday, I was busy with my filming crew for my documentary, and we visited some of my relatives. Last Saturday, I visited one of my relatives in Pinole, and then last Sunday, I visited my cousin Bruce Kwan Jr. And you hear me talking about him quite often because he is my first cousin, and he has a lot of history about our family. And also, you see what's right behind me? Bruce gave me that on Sunday. And this, what is behind me, is a timeline of the Chinese experience in America. And this starts at 1850. That's when our great grandfather first stepped foot on the shores of America, and especially right here in San Francisco in 1850, right after the start of the gold rush. So, anyway, this is the book by my cousin Bruce Kwan. As you see, it's a little singed here. Uh, you remember last October 10th, my shelter went on, was torched and burned to the ground by an arsonist. This is one of the few books that actually, this is the only book that survived that fire. And it was amazing because I had this book with my other books. I had How to Win Friends and Influence People, and several other books, and then some books that were given to me by people that visit me, and so they know that I'm an avid reader, and that I love reading history and learning facts. I'm not a person that likes science fiction a whole lot, unless it's like Star Wars or something like that. But anyway, this book survived the fire, the only one, and they were all together. This one was actually, I was surprised that this survived because uh, in the stack of books that I had, this was on top. So this should have burned first. But as you see, it's burned here. It's singed all the way around. Look at that. And all the other books that were underneath it and next to it all were destroyed. But this one was fireproof. So anyway, this book here is written by my cousin, my first cousin, Bruce Kwan Jr. And so has a lot of great information here. I'm going to talk about this right behind me, but this is a great book. It's a good history of the trials and tribulations of my great grandfather and our family beginnings here in the Bay Area, and he became a multi millionaire in a time that Chinese people couldn't or shouldn't have been uh, successful. And there were a lot of laws. I'm going to go over. It's amazing all the laws that uh, our government, our white government, created against minorities, and we were not the first, but we're not the last either. So anyway, um, over in San Francisco, I got to catch up a lot with my first cousin Bruce Kwan, and we toured San Francisco Chinatown at because our family actually owned a city block in San Francisco, and we went to go visit it, and we talked with some of the shopkeepers that were there on the block. That One of the shops has been there for over 99 years. He's about to hit 100 years. This is like the third owner, and he's a relative of the original, the past ownership. So he has a lot of ties. And Bruce, my cousin, spoke with this shopkeeper, shop owner, and told him about the history of his building and what was there when our family had constructed that building. In fact, the building that he was in My great grandfather, he owned, uh, with other members of the family, a construction company, and they that was one of the very first brick buildings restored, reconstructed right after the 1906 earthquake. One of the very first. And then next door to it, the Republic Hotel, 710, I think it was 710 Kearney, or is it Sacramento? It was Kearney and Sacramento, and but it was really interesting seeing the whole block, seeing the buildings that our family created, and then also how it thrived, because they're right underneath uh, the hotel rooms was what was known as big band era. And so there were shows, and it was Cons, Kans, right between the bottom floor and the hotel. And it was a very popular spot. Hollywood um, stars would come to San Francisco to look at or to watch the exotic fan dances and shows that were presented by the Chinese by that Chinese club, Cons, Kan''S, and the likes of Danny Thomas and others were seen frequently at cons here in San Francisco because it was something different. It was different entertainment at the time, and this was back in the 20s and 30s. Very different period of time and very different people. But anyway, uh, it was interesting learning some of the facts, seeing some of the property that our family owned. We owned an entire city block in San Francisco. We don't own it anymore, unfortunately. That's because of what our government did to the Chinese people. But this was, I want to show you, this is one of the very first uh, family documents where a family member, this was Jean, my cousin Jean, she's deceased now, and she first put this together back in the mid 80s along with Bruce Kwan Jr. So there's a lot of early information in here, and this was loaned out to my documentary company, and they were able to reproduce whatever portions they needed to do without any problems. And then again, like I said, Bruce's book, Bitter Roots, that one's available on Amazon right now. And then also we had another historian, Roland Huey, and he worked with my cousin Bruce at, on this. And this is the book that he wrote, and it's also available on Amazon.com. And so, anyway, that's a little briefing of my family and the books that we have out on our family right now. So, I'm going to go over this timeline. So, I'm going to turn this around and we're going to go over the top timeline. The bottom portion here, the orange and green, they have different meanings. We'll get to that, the legend, and show you what the color coding is along, and we're going to go across the timeline uh, piece by piece. So stick with me. We'll be right back. Okay, here we have the timeline, the Chinese experience in America, and here's the legend. So all the white box, Chinese experience in the US, green box, events that were happening in China at the time, and then the orange box, events in the US. So we're just going to go right here, start right off with this, and we're going to go right here, 1850. Foreign miners tax license requires monthly payment of $3 from every foreign miner who did not desire to become a citizen. The state of California raises this fees many times over the next few years. The intent of the tax is to discourage any Chinese from participating in gold mining. So that was one of the first things. Then we have People versus Hall. California State Supreme Court rules that Chinese cannot give testimony in court. That was very racist, but also there was a language discrepancy. So there was some uh, reason for that, some validation for that, but uh, not any real reason to exempt the Chinese from giving any kind of testimony. But that's what they did. Then we go to 1860, Act for the Protection of Fisheries. And this is really crazy here because they were targeting the Chinese so that they couldn't create a fishing business and sell fish to the population. Then 1862, Chinese hired to build Transcontinental Railroad. And let's see, then we go to 1868, the Burlingame Treaty, supported by U.S. Railroad companies, promotes Chinese immigration to provide railroad labor. And that's where the Chinese become a very valuable asset for a short period of time, where it was cheap labor. Then we go down to 1870, Cubic Air Ordinance. What that was, they were jamming Asian men into tiny rooms. In fact, there may be 10, 15 men in a small room. And then this was created so that there were fewer men in the room. It wasn't doing them a favor. It was a way of pushing them out of Chinatown because there weren't enough rooms, and they were relegated to just certain areas of San Francisco at the time. Then we have the Sidewalk Ordinance, prohibits the carrying of loads on poles on sidewalks. So you see that picture there? That's how a lot of the Asian men carried a lot of load across their shoulders, carrying 2 baskets on a pole or on a single pole. So they prohibit carrying loads with a pole like that. Naturalization Act extends citizenship eligibility to African-born residents or people of African descent. Chinese are not eligible for citizenship, and immigration of wives of Chinese laborers is prohibited. So a lot of racist laws. Then 1872, Chinese banned from owning real estate or business licenses in California. We can't even own a business, so they don't want us here. 1973, we have Laundry Ordinance, levies a quarterly tax of $2 on horse-drawn vehicles. Those without vehicles pay $15. That was really unfair. But it for the whites that had laundries, this was there, and they had delivery services. That's why they had horse-drawn vehicles, whereas the Asians did not. They were cash and carry type deal. So 1975, the Q Ordinance, we'll go back to 1873, requires that any jailed Chinese man who cannot pay his fines has to cut his hair to 1 inch length. During the Qing Dynasty, Han men, Chinese men, showed their heads, were guilty of treason in China. So that was taking away their identity, cutting their hair, because a lot of the Asian men back then had the long ponytails, and so they would make them cut them off. Then we have 1875, Page Law, prohibits immigration of women from Oriental countries as prostitutes. A lot of them, unfortunately, because there wasn't work, they did what they had to have money to survive. 1878, Ninth Circuit Court of California, right here in San Francisco, rules Chinese ineligible for natural citizenship. Yeah. So we go down to 1880, and we see these here. Anti-miscegenation laws are passed for first time in California, prohibiting marriage of a white person to a Negro, mulatto, or a Mongolian. So that wasn't good. No mixed marriages, in other words, especially with white women. Um, an act uh, relating to fishing in the waters of the state is passed, California, which states that aliens incapable of becoming electors of this state are hereby prohibited from fishing or taking any fish, lobster, shrimp, or shellfish of any kind for purpose of selling or giving to another person to sell. No business uh, to the Chinese. Then in 1882, we have the Chinese Exclusion Act that came into play. You read it right there, imposed a 10-year ban on immigration of Chinese laborers. Courts prohibit the naturalization of Chinese persons. Chinese residing in the U.S. who travel to China to visit their families must obtain a re-entry certificate before coming back to the U.S. This is the first federal law excluding a single group of people from immigrating to the United States on the basis of race or ethnicity alone. So this is where the white racism was first introduced. I mean, where they put it on the Chinese folks first. So we go up 1888. Scott Act prohibits all Chinese laborers who leave the United States or who plan to leave from re-entering. The Scott Act cancels all previously issued certificates of return, preventing 20,000 Chinese laborers who held these certificates from returning to the United States. My cousin Bruce has one of those certificates that allowed my great grandfather to come back along with my my great grandfather come back along with his family, and he also was married, and it took a while to bring my great grandmother here to America, but it did happen. Then we have the 1892 Gary Act, extends the Exclusion Act for 10 years. So a lot of these names, you'll notice that in San Francisco, these are streets of these persons that they thought were real important to American history. And in fact, they were sequestering a real American history by excluding the Chinese. So anyway, we go from 1892, we go to 1898, and that's going to be U.S. versus Wong Kim Ark. U.S. Supreme Courts hold that Wong Kim Ark, a San Francisco resident who was born in the U.S. in 1871, can be a citizen. He was born on these shores, and white America was saying, no, even if you're born here, we don't want you here. And so U.S. Supreme Court said that he is a citizen. He was born on these shores. So case establishes that virtually anyone born in the U.S. may become a naturalized citizen. So this was the first time when Chinese were allowed to call themselves citizens, U.S. citizens, right here, if they were born in the United States. And so we go to the 1900s, San Francisco Chinatown quarantined for a bubonic plague scare. Chinatown residents prohibited from leaving Chinatown unless they agree to be injected with a dangerous plague vaccine. And vaccines back then, we didn't know what they were doing. Very different time from then versus now. We go up here to 1904, and Congress makes all Chinese exclusion laws permanent. So very racist period in the early 1900s. 1906, Great San Francisco earthquake and fire leaves 300,000 homeless. Buildings in Chinatown are destroyed. San Francisco City Hall burns, along with city birth records. Many Chinese living in San Francisco used the loss of the official records as a way to claim they were born in California. New Chinese immigrants arrive in the U.S. claiming to be related to San Francisco Chinese residents, and they were called paper sons back then. We'll cover that at another time. The infrastructure destruction from the earthquake ushers a second outbreak of plague in San Francisco. The Chinese community is not affected by the plague. So this was another one of the racist signs of the time, and you can see what it says there. So after that, we go down to 1910. Angel Island opens right here in the bay, and this serves as Ellis Island of the West for thousands of immigrants of Chinese and Asian descent. U.S. policy of Chinese exclusion subjects many Chinese to lengthy interrogations during their confinement on the island. Chinese detainees composed poems about their treatment on the walls of the barracks. It was pretty horrible. I've read a lot of stories on this and did a lot of research on Angel Island. It was a horrible situation, but it's part of our history. Then we go to 1913. California Alien Land Acts prohibits Chinese and Japanese from owning land, and other states pass similar laws. We jump to 1922, Cable Act, also called Women's Independent Nationality Act, reverses earlier policy in which a woman always assumes the citizenship of her husband. The Cable Act allows women to keep their citizenship except in the case of marrying an Asian man. Any Asian American woman who marries an alien ineligible for citizenship shall cease to be a citizen of the United States. Now that was really horrible. Number one, to the women who were naturalized American citizens, and that was very racist by saying she loses her citizenship because she married an Asian man, and we had that in the family. We had my Aunt Dean marry my great uncle. That would have been Ralph Sr., and that was a mixed marriage, and they had Ralph Jr., who became an Oakland homicide police officer. So yeah, that was a horrible time. And in 1922, that was when my mother was born, in 1922. Then we had the queue from custom ends, nearly 300-year requirement of Han Chinese men wearing their hair in a queue, symbol of submission to Qing Dynasty rule, formally ends with Puyi, the last emperor of China, cutting his hair. Then we have 1924, Asian Exclusion Immigration Act, adjusts immigration quotas, stops immigration from all Asian nations. I mean, it stopped all immigration. That's more like an Ellis Island type of picture. I don't believe that was Angel Island at the time. It doesn't have any signs or looks of Angel Island. That was the Emperor of China at the time. Then we have 1943. Chinese exclusion laws are repealed and China's quota is set at a token 105 immigrants annually. Now, this is interesting right here in the fact that my family, the home that my grandfather was in, he was in there as a very young man, but he could not have the home in his name right here in Grand Avenue. And his name and my grandmother's name did not go on title until 1946. Before that, it was held by our bank in Hong Kong, and the U.S. government tried to get those titles for those 5 homes, and steal the homes from my family. So 1946 was an important period. But then and then we're going to go back over here, look at a few of the other things. 1839, 1860, Britain and other Western nations demand that China open trade to British goods. So that was an event in China. Then we have 1850, 1864, the Taipei Rebellion, most important episode of radical political and religious upheaval in 19th century China. Taipei rebels seek to replace traditional Confucianism with communal property and a form of Christianity. With British and French assistance, Qing dynasty rulers eventually crushed the rebellion at the cost of 20 million Chinese lives. Wow, that's pretty crazy. Then you see 1850, California is admitted into the U.S. as free state, September 9th, 1850. That's U.S. event. And so there were some other events down here. So we're just going to skim right through these, give you an opportunity to freeze it and read if need be. Here's some pictures, some more pictures. 1869, Transcontinental Railroad is completed, but no Chinese laborers are in the picture. There's the picture, and it's all white folks in there. Then the viewpoint of how America viewed the Chinese. They wanted us dead. They saw us as a snake, and they were going to cut off our heads. New York Stock Exchange collapses May 5th, 1893. Plessy and Ferguson versus Ferguson, the Supreme Court states that racial segregation is approved under separate but equal doctrine. Boxer Rebellion, Western influence in China. We have a stamp of one of the leaders back then. 1816, Yuan, okay, he was one of the warlords. 1913, 1911, 1925, 1949, Chinese Civil War ends with the defeat of the KMT. So so that's the timeline here that my cousin Bruce Kwan gave me right here. In fact, next year, 2024, we are having a family picture opportunity, and we're looking for our family members of the Lu Hing family. And next year in May 2024, we plan on doing a family portrait or family picture, kind of like what they did back in 1911. It was in the family home back then, but we're going to try and get as many folks together as possible, because Bruce is already 77, and he said he's finishing up his next book here, and he wants his family, his relative or his family, his daughters, wife, and family members to understand and know about his line of the family. And so anyway, it's important that we get as many of the Lu Hing relatives, descendants into this picture next year. We're going to be shooting it in San Francisco at the Chinese Historical Society. And there's going to be a dedication there that's being planned right now, and a lot of new photographs and other things that family members here are providing that aren't part of the family documents and records in the Chinese Historical Society. So anyway, next year, May 2024, we're going to get as many family members put together as possible, get a family portrait. And the family portrait that we did looked like that back then. So we're going to try and do something like that, but not in a home setting, obviously. But this will, we're going to be trying to update all of the lineage so that we include the new great grandchildren, and update from this. This was originally put together by Gene, my cousin Gene, in 1987. That's when this was printed. So this was one of the very first printings, and real important to update. This is kind of like our version of Ancestry without being Ancestry. Thanks for joining me today. We'll be right back.